Charlotte, welcome to the CRA Corner podcast. We're so excited to have you in this conversation with us in this episode because you have one of the roles that everybody in the industry wants to know about. It's one of the golden roles in clinical operations, which is the CRA role. And Charlotte, would you perhaps want to introduce you to the audience? Should we start with that?
Great. Well, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to discuss the role more. So, yeah, I'm a senior CRA, been a senior CRA for the past year or so, but been in the industry for about 7 years now, four of which have been CRA, nearly five. But yeah, started out as a clinical trials assistant for my local hospital after I finished university. And it was more of a hybrid role, kind of did everything, collected patient consent, entered data, generated reports. It was a very small study team. So then after that, I joined a medical device company as a CTA again and learned more about different types of studies, learned more about medical devices. Hadn't heard of them before either, and went more down that route. 'Cause after then, I discovered the CRA role during that job. I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. That sounds quite it's intense, but I love the responsibility side of it. So I started looking for junior CRA roles, which I got with a startup CRO and carried on from there.
That's so cool. You've touched base on certain things in the introduction that I think we would love to learn more about because the industry struggles to find that first job as a CRA. And once you are a CRA, how do you develop and how do you grow your career being a CRA? So both of us, Annalisa and I, were CRAs as well in the industry. And I started as a CTA, then I switched to a CRA role for IQVIA at the time. Sorry, I was at Icon. Then I switched to IQVIA, then I went to Cineos, and I started actually monitoring observational studies, which is also one of the ways that sometimes we begin because they're, I wouldn't say less complex, maybe they're slightly less complex, but it requires less traveling from the CRA, so it can be less stressful, especially as you are adjusting and adapting and learning how to monitor clinical trials. And Alisa, how was your introduction into the CRA role?
Yeah, for me, actually, the start was a little bit different than yours. I was fortunate enough to get straight to the CRA position. I did do slightly like preclinical studies. I did do studies on mice and on drugs. So I was a little bit like knowledgeable of the industry, but still it was something really new. And fortunate enough at the time, there was a position opening for CRA role, and I was able to get into that. But maybe, Charlotte, I would really like to know first, maybe, how did you become known of this industry, or what information did you get before you actually knew to look for a CTA position in a hospital? What's your background on that?
I didn't know anything about the industry when I first got my job in the industry.
Like most of
Yeah. So when I finished my undergraduate degree, I was studying zoology, and I was just applying to every job that seemed relevant to it. And I
Mhm.
just happened to get an interview at my local hospital looking for someone to help out on an osteoporosis study. And I hadn't heard about osteoporosis much before either. And I thought, I've got an interview, I'll go along, see what it's like, not expecting to get the job at all. But I went there and they quite liked me. They quite liked that I didn't have any experience yet and they could train me up. And then when I started there, they're like, okay, so this is what a clinical trial is. I'm like, okay, I've heard of clinical trials before, but I didn't know there was so many job roles in it and so many different versions of it and how it varies. So it was, yeah, I didn't know about it before. I just fell into it and then loved it and stayed in it.
And you also have a background in medical device, but also drugs. So, like, like for me, I did mostly drugs, and now with our company, we're now getting more into medical device. So it's really, I would say, even a different world in there. But how would you describe it for a CRA who maybe only has done medical device or only has done IP? Like, what's the difference between these two industries, or not industries, but sections of industry?
I think it's quite good to get experience of both. I certainly prefer medical devices just because I find
Hmm.
devices more interesting to learn about than drugs. But I think the main difference is, well, before it was that the medical device studies, it tends to be a lot more lenient in what you could do. Drugs are a lot more heavily regulated compared to medical devices, but that is changing now, and there's obviously less focus on the composition of of the device. It's more about the performance of it, how it operates. You focus on device accountability, so serial numbers and manufacturing products, and you learn a lot about good manufacturing practice more than
Yeah.
drug creation and
Yeah, the drug
processes. So it
development.
does, yeah, a lot of it is similar. So you do monitor it a lot in the same ways, but there's, depending on the device, it's less likely that you give them out to patients, they take them away, take some, and then bring them back. It's more all
Yeah.
done on site, and yeah, it's a lot more electrical testing and all those kind of fun bits. So yeah, it does vary quite a bit, but the essentials of what you're monitoring stay the same.
Another question regarding, so you became from CTA role into CRA role. So what did you see the main difference being for you? Because you said that in your CTA role, you were doing quite a lot of activities that maybe are not part of like usual CTA role, but what was the difference for you to come from the CTA role into a CRA role? And maybe also, how did you finally get into that? What were your secrets to ensure that you did get that position as well?
I was a CTA for a medical device company, so sponsor director. So it was a little bit different. It was more working behind the scenes. A lot of it was helping to improve the product as well as just doing the standard CTA stuff like helping create TMFs and ISF. So I did a lot of internal little trials on the staff members there to collect data, which then led me on to learning about how to collect informed consent properly, about creating good consent forms and monitoring those aspects, seeing what needs to be completed and what it means if data's missing if they've not signed it correctly. And it started from there. So we hired a freelance CRA to monitor one of the big studies that the company was starting. And that was the first time I heard of the CRA role. I'd never heard of it before. I saw my pathway be CTA coordinator, project manager, and that was the career progression I'd imagined. And then I heard about this new role. It kind of threw a spanner in the works. Go, okay, what is this role? I want to learn more about it. And it just sounded really cool. It sounded really cool that you got to go to sites and interact with the hospitals and see the studies from their perspective and then feed that back to the sponsor, and getting to work between both the sponsor and the site is what really intrigued me about it. So then I just thought, okay, I'll just see what CRA's roles are out there, what they look for and how I can apply for them, what sort of skills I needed, and built it up from there. So learning to be more proactive in the way that I worked, more detail oriented, and started building up skills that you need to be a CRA whilst a CTA to prepare for moving on to the next role.
Which brings a great point, Charlotte, because you've mentioned the skills that you need to get as you are a CTA and learn what are the skills needed for the CRA role. Can I ask you from your perspective, what were those skills that you would say it helped you or you developed in your first few months of experience that then helped you and you needed as a CRA?
So there's quite a lot that come to mind, but yeah, definitely time management, organization,
Yeah.
those type of skills. The communication skill was one of the key ones that I wanted to build up. Having good communication skills, relationship building between sites and sponsors, those sort of aspects is was really needed, because it's different when you work for sponsor, because as a CTA, because teams there you can talk to everyone in person. It was back in the days we were all in the office as well, so it was easier in that sense. And then working independently as well and being confident in making the decisions that I needed to be made whilst on site. So it was a lot of confidence building as well, and going, actually, yeah, I do know my stuff, and having the assertiveness to tell it to sites or to push back on project managers and all those kind of skills. So it was a good process. I feel like I did really build as an individual, build upon myself and become a much stronger
Yeah.
career driven person.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I remember that one of the biggest challenges I had when I turned or when I switched to the role of a CRA is that those soft skills core to the CRA role, they don't come naturally to you unless you, of course, have had the chance to practice them, to learn them, and they come with time and with practice and exercise. So those you mentioned communication, which is core to the CRA role, and you also mentioned that confidence in the way you need to know that you know your protocol, you know your
Yeah.
guidelines, you know your regulation, and even though you are supposed to enforce a little bit the application of those guidelines or the protocol to potentially someone who's way more experienced than you, that doesn't mean that you don't have the authority in a way to say it or the confidence to know that
Yeah.
what we should be doing. So it definitely builds you as a person, even those soft skills of confidence, of communication, of relationships building, that you also apply them and need them even outside of your professional. And
Yeah,
I even
definitely.
think that in some layer I am who I'm today, even though I'm not a CRA anymore, but some of the skills that I have are because of those, I would say, challenging a little bit beginning of the CRA role, but those skills I developed then are who also make me who I am today.
One thing actually what I remember as well from the when I was applying for the CRA role, because IQVIA is a really US based company, so US people are more open and really like talkative and everything else,
Mm.
not really what Estonian people are about. So I was really told to basically go in and speak of yourself as you are the best one ever. Like you need to speak so much of like high praise of yourself just because it's a US based company. You look at it a little bit different and you need to be really like self-aware, not be afraid, really be out there just to even achieve the role for CRA. So that I really remembered that you need to basically get out of the comfort zone and actually
Yeah.
be a little bit somebody else because if you want the job,
Yeah.
then you just need to be a little bit more open and willing to show that you are able to communicate, you are able to basically collaborate with people all over the world. So it's definitely,
Mm,
I think it was a
mm.
good tip that was given because otherwise, yeah, I would be just sitting there a little bit like inside myself and not really trying to show what I can do.
It makes sense. Most of us, when we join this industry, we're young. We are
Yeah.
70% of the workforce in clinical operations are even women. So we're young women who potentially don't have that much experience or don't have that much exposure. Maybe we're more on the softer side. And you're exposed to a industry that is challenging, that can be tough, that can be also hard to you on a personal level if you don't have some of the
Mhm.
skills that you need to grow. But at the same time,
Yeah.
most of us join this industry because we have a commitment, right? We have a passion, we have a goal.
Yeah.
We're driven by wanting to contribute to innovation, to research, to bringing those drugs to the market, to patients, to saving even people's lives. If we can have a small impact, as small as it is, that was one of the things that motivated me to at least try to get that job, to contribute as a CRA. Charlotte, may I potentially also ask you, what drove you besides, I know that the role sounded fun, right? And exciting. And there's a traveling part. But I also know that in order to stay on the job, and you are still a senior CRA, there's more to it that makes you stay. What's that thing that makes you stay as a CRA?
Been thinking about this a little bit because it's really good to reflect on. And
Mhm.
one of the things I really enjoy about the role is the variety of it and the problem solving aspect. So I like that no 2 days are the same as a
Yes.
CRA. Each study, each site, they all have different problems, different project managers you work with, and if you're working on devices versus drugs, it's all really different. And every
Yeah.
day you'll face something that's completely new that will challenge you in a different way, that'll make you think about things in a different way or make you be more creative about how you can solve this problem. And then with that, and then having the overall knowledge that you're contributing to patient safety and
Mhm.
their well-being and having that responsibility, that's what keeps me really interested in the job.
Totally.
Yeah. I think that's really a thing that resonates as well with me because when I became a clinical lead and had been there, I think like 1.5 years, I always felt that CRA role is more, in a sense, challenging and more you have so much things that could happen and actually you need to find solutions and activities to do. But in clinically, it was quite like straightforward. You knew what you need to do every week, every day, but for CRA, it's just something really interesting. Even if you have been in the role indeed for several years, you still can experience new things that you haven't done before. Is it even an inspection audit? But as well, like maybe a patient dying, what then happens, or similar to that. So it's really, I think, a road that never ends. You always keep learning something new. So it's really, I really liked it as well.
Especially when you get new things emerging like AI and risk-based
Yeah.
monitoring and decentralized
Yes.
trials and
Yeah.
COVID, everyone working from home now. It's one that does keep evolving and keep
Yes.
changing and you have to keep adapting to, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't even imagine what the CRA role is gonna be. Like for us, it was really straightforward. Like, just go in and check and have a look if everything is according to regulations. But indeed now it's really evolving, and I would even most probably changing as well a little bit, in a sense. So it's gonna be
Yeah, it's
interesting.
changed a lot. It changed a lot, but as Charlotte says, I think only for, or at least in my opinion, what I see from the industry and from the community too, it's only changing for the right reasons, because
Yeah,
somehow it's driven by innovation. The industry is changing, and
yeah,
it would not be natural if the role didn't adjust and change and evolve as well, because that would mean that our role would stay behind and we don't stay relevant in the industry. So that's why the CRA role is also changing with what Charlotte was mentioning. DCTs, AI, technology, especially driven by technology, because that allows us or CRAs to now focus on the human aspect more of clinical trials, of the monitoring side, of the relationships, of the trends, behaviors, of spotting risks. And some of those more administrative tasks can rely completely on technology, which is also, to be fair, a burden that it's loaded off the shoulders of CRAs, isn't it, Charlotte?
yeah.
Yes, yeah, it is.
Did
So if we are to, let's say, paint a picture of what a CRA does, I would love to, maybe there is someone listening to us or watching this video who potentially is interested into being a CRA, which I absolutely encourage you to. We still need more CRAs. The industry still needs CRAs, and CRAs are still going to be relevant in the near future as well. So if we were to paint a picture of what a CRA does, or what your day-to-day would look like as a CRA, could you maybe let us know, Charlotte, what are those core tasks of a CRA role?
Yeah, so like I said, it does vary from day to day, but it usually involves balancing your planned tasks with unexpected issues that could arise throughout the day as well. So it could be, so you could have a day where you're reviewing patient data, essential documents, following up on action items for previous visits, or monitoring what IMP has gone out, what's due to go out, what's going to be expired, and those kind of aspects where you're more desk based for the day. You're looking at the numbers, you're keeping track of everything, make sure everything's taken over. You could be having meetings with your project managers and study team, or with your sites, or you could have a day where you're
Yeah.
preparing for your monitoring visit, and then the days where you're at your monitoring visit or your site selection visit, SIVs, closeout visits. So it really depends. And then you spend a large part of your day communicating with people, whether it be,
Mhm.
like I said, your study teams or answering site queries, answering phone calls, escalating risks where needed, and making sure everything's documented clearly. So there's a lot of documentation that you need to do as well. But
Yeah.
I quite enjoy that aspect of the job as well. It's quite fun. And yeah, some days, like I said, they'd be very site focused. So you're either traveling to site, having face to face discussions, trying to get the PI to have a meeting with you about the monitoring visit. And then there's your report writing, so you could spend a day just writing up your
Yeah.
reports and that aspect of the job. So it does vary quite a lot, but I think that's what's quite nice. So one day you sat at the desk looking at trackers, the next day you're out traveling, and then writing reports the day after. You can have a day full of meetings. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly if this is what you do in a day because there's
Yeah.
so much the role encompasses.
Yeah. But
and
makes
maybe
sense.
a question to you: how do you manage all of that? Because it's a lot of activities to
Yeah.
do for a person. But maybe what is your coping mechanism? Because I think the burnout thing is quite like happening in our industry. So how do you manage that workload that you have?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a juggling act, but I think it's if you're quite an organized person, being organized from the get-go really helps. So having your folders set up in your email whatever email system you use to help organize, go, okay, this is high risk, this is low risk, this is for this project which I'm working on this day. Having good trackers in place, having a good team as well really helps. So if you've got a supportive project manager or a CTA or other CRAs that can help with workload. And one of the biggest things I learned was prioritization. So just because an email's coming from the site, you don't have to respond to it straight away. You can finish the task that you're doing that's of higher importance, then come back to that at a later date, or vice versa. If this email comes through, there's been a serious event that's taken place, you can park that task that you're doing if you're looking at your query table for whatever reason and focus on that. So at the beginning, I was trying to make sure I did it all at the same time, and you're flipping back and forth between tasks, which makes it difficult as well, easy to get confused. And then to avoid burnout, it is quite hard for the CRAs because it is such an intense job. But for me, I found little ways of making sure I did take a few coffee breaks during the day. I did go for a run when I wanted to, or go to the gym when I was traveling. Make sure I stayed at a hotel that had a spa and a gym and those aspects. And when I could, just having a strict rule. Okay, this is when I clock off. Whatever's left unfinished, if it can wait till tomorrow, I'll wait till tomorrow. So there's little tips and tricks you can do that help. Sometimes it just helps having someone who's in the industry, whether you work for them at the minute or not, that you can vent to as well, to get it all out. That really helps. To get it all off your chest. So there's a few little coping mechanisms that really help. But if you really enjoy the role and really passionate about it, some days you work a little bit later. Some days I worked an hour or two over, and I didn't mind because I liked the job so much. So it depends on how you approach it and what your preferences are. If you want a standard 9 to 5 where you can clock off and forget about the day, maybe you might struggle with the CRA role.
I remember that I was thinking, did I get burned out when I was a CRA, as you were speaking about it? And I think burnout can come in very different shapes and forms. And burnout can be just getting completely exhausted and you're done with the job and you don't want to do more of it. Or burnout can get to a point where you're just unmotivated and you don't find the job exciting anymore and you fall into this boredom sort of type of burnout. Burnout can come in several shapes and forms. And I think I did absolutely get into that side of burnout at one point where I raised it to my line manager, and unfortunately, there was no change that we could do into that company specifically. So one of the actions that I took to break that burnout a little bit was changing company. And I loved the job. The job wasn't the issue. The issue was the type of study maybe that I had been working on now for 2 years or maybe even more. So you get into this space of now you want to grow, you want new activities, you already have some curiosity, you want a little bit of novelty as well. But there's so much diversity into clinical trial monitoring that a new therapeutical area, a new phase of a new study that maybe you haven't worked with, a new site that you haven't worked with, there's always something new that will happen or that you can be assigned to, and it feels like a completely new job.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. It seems simple, but yeah, just change companies.
Yeah.
If it's not going anywhere, or if you have the option, you can change teams if that's something that your company has. But yeah, I think that's a really good tip.
And I think also what Charlotte really well said, which I did as well in the beginning, is micromanagement. So I try to do everything like as a small thing as possible, but at the end of the day, you need to understand what is actually relevant and what not, because otherwise you will burn out and you will absorb into this just trying to do all small things, but it doesn't actually bring you value. So I did do the same thing, that I just tried to understand what needs to be done and what is just, because we see a lot of activities as well happening in the companies that doesn't make any sense. They just do it because somebody had a great idea and never asked about actually how people work, but just to understand actually what brings value and what doesn't. So definitely like trying to understand yourself. And another thing I really liked what you mentioned is the work and life balance, because you need to understand that indeed if you need to go and run in the middle of the day because you're like burning out, then that's what you need to do. So just to basically you need to be there for yourself and really think for your health, because nobody else is going to do it. So whatever works.
I'd say you definitely need to one of the skills I found hardest to learn was to advocate for yourself. So to push back when needed and say, actually, no, I need to take a break now. No, I can't do that today. I can't physically fit anymore working about burning out. So it's key to, like you said, no one else is going to take care of your physical health and mental health but you. So understanding that and knowing that you need to take time for yourself is really important.
Yeah.
And also, don't wait until it's too late,
Yeah.
because if we think of already, I'll take a run because I need it, then it might be already too late. So building those well-being great practices, if we're speaking of good practices always in this industry, we need to also take some good practices from the very beginning, because that's what will ensure that it's sustainable and that we can stay in the job when balanced and in still excited and still motivated and still doing the job that most of us love, because most of us love being a CRA and it's a very exciting job. So let's brighten it up, girls. If we think of the one thing, what the fun parts or the exciting parts of being a CRA, I can think of how excited I always was to try new hotels. I don't know about you, but when I was traveling, sometimes you travel a lot, especially depending on the region that you're monitoring. So I was monitoring here in Spain, and at the first 2 years, maybe after 2 years, you already have your hotels, you go to the same hotels, you have your routine. But the first 2 years, you're going to new places, you're going to new, even if it's a small village somewhere in the south of Spain, it doesn't matter. It's a novelty. There's a lot of novelty that comes into your life with the role. So I absolutely loved to try new hotels that had, like Charlotte was saying, a spa, or maybe a great breakfast, or maybe a great route around the hotel that you could go for a walk or for a run. So I absolutely loved that as a CRA. What was one thing that comes to mind that you loved about the job?
I agree, yeah. So trying new hotels is great. It's really fun, especially when you walk into the hotel room and you have a look around, say, what's in this one? Is there a hair dryer? Is it got a waterfall shower? All those aspects. So yeah, but I also liked going to the different hospitals and seeing how they varied from each other, like what the hospital in London compared to the hospital that was in Edinburgh, and doing tours around it and speaking to all the different people there I found really fun, and seeing how their perspectives were on the study. Some the hospital teams that I met were really laid back and really chatty and had loads of time. Other ones were, we do it this way and we go here and we've got this room for you here. And it's fun to see the differences in the teams depending on location as well.
Really?
So the funny thing for us, because we are like a small country, so you go and explore new hotels. What Estonians actually were really excited about is if you're going to get an upgrade or not. So basically, we were always going to the hotel and just fingers crossed, can I get the upgrade this today?
Yeah.
And explore one hotel that had multiple
Yeah.
different like levels. So that was our like excitement.
We all have some level of excitement into the job, but I do
Mm.
think that to remind everyone who potentially is interested into the CRA job, sometimes we forget how impactful it is in a clinical trial operations and in the conduct and the result of bringing that drug to the market or not, because sometimes we get so stuck into the monitoring the documentation or monitoring the data or monitoring the investigational product or going to the pharmacy. So we get stuck into the activities itself and forget the bigger picture. But I always give this example, just a little story that helps me even remind myself of the impact of what we do. And I was monitoring the closeout of a study when I was early, maybe year 2 of being a CRA. And if that drug was going to be reviewed, of course, and analyzed, and the results, and if it was going to be approved, it was going to be available on the market to the patients who had a specific type of glaucoma, and without that treatment, all the other treatment options that were available in the market, none of them gave them such a good eye vision repair than this specific drug. So for us, it's a great treatment, but for a patient specifically, getting back 20% more of their eyesight when you already have only 30% or 40%, it's so much more than just the 5%. So it's a lot from the patient's perspective. I remember that 2 years later, around that, or maybe a year later, the CRAs received from the sponsor anonymized letters, so we didn't know where these letters were coming from or from who were writing them, but we were told that these letters were from the patients who had participated in the study, that now as a result of the drug being available on the market, they had this treatment available to them and they could get it in their standard care as they were seeing their doctors. So they were just grateful messages of how this of our impact contributed to, of course, the drug getting to the market. So it just made us remember, it serves as a reminder of, yes, you might not see the end result or the impact of what you're doing right now, because now you're just focusing on going to that hospital and checking if the temperature of the pharmacy storage, is there any spike in the temperature? If not, but in a year or maybe in 2 years or maybe even more, but that impact of your job maybe helped save someone's life, and it has such a bigger impact than we can even see on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think a lot of actually patients get this excitement and really this kind of like relief that we do not hear about. So this is definitely, I think, something
Yeah.
we need to keep in our heads, not to forget. And this, I think, really nice story that you just gave is most probably happening even more often than we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as CRAs, it's not patients mainly don't know about us. They know about the doctors and they'll know
Yeah.
about the sponsor and perhaps a few other roles. But CRA, especially because we never see the patients,
Yeah.
it can be hard to forget that aspect of it. So when you get something like that, the letters and the drugs released, and you can see the impact of it, it's really rewarding, and it's good to
Yeah.
remember that. For especially if you're doing a long study, that's five-year plus, you keep going, this is going to be have a great
Yeah.
impact on so many people's lives. It's a really good motivator.
Absolutely. So if we were to give, let's say, one tip for someone who is fighting hard to get that CRA job, because we know that that's how it works. Unfortunately, getting that first job as a CRA usually is challenging. And maybe if our specific stories does not convey that difficulty of getting that job, please don't take us as a representation of the industry because maybe we're just slightly lucky. But the reality is that it is hard to get that first CRA job because many ask for experience. How are you getting that experience if they don't give the chance to entry level positions or to aspiring CRAs, or there's no other role that gives you a direct experience into the job? So it's hard. I know it takes time. We've talked about this so often, even in previous episodes. But if you had to give one tip for someone who's starting out in the industry or as a CRA, maybe one tip that serves as preparation, or maybe one tip that will give you higher chances in getting the job, what would be that one tip? Maybe Annalisa, maybe can I start with you? What would be yours?
Yeah, it's which one to select from to
Yep.
but I think it's still the same thing that I have, I think, already maybe mentioned in the previous episode, is the network, to try just get
Mm.
in connection with as many people as possible. Of course, for some like countries it might be a little bit difficult because we, even for Estonia, as I mentioned, we do not have so many CRAs or clinical operation teams here. But as Maria has spoken also regarding Barcelona, which is basically a hub for clinical trials, you have the possibility to even meet up. But we have LinkedIn, we have this kind of community as CRAConnect is. I think it's still, especially now, it really comes down to the networking and being known that you are out there. Right now, there is already quite several CRA or like aspiring CRAs, actually people who want to become a CRAs, who are there, and you already know them, their names,
Yep.
even though they're not CRA. So I think it still comes down quite a lot on that.
Great tip. Networking is key. It unlocks anything and everything in this
Yeah.
industry, which makes me think we're even organizing literally 4 events that are remote just to focus on networking, because we sometimes think, and I think it's a wrong approach, that we should only network or we should only reach out to recruiters or talent acquisition or heads of clinical operations. And that is not necessarily what networking means, because creating your network, it might even mean of roles that are on the same level as you, other CRAs, other CTAs, other study startup, or other potential colleagues, potential peers in the roles that you are looking for. And potentially those roles specifically will end up at one point posting an ad from their company that is maybe recruiting for that team, or maybe they will just pop in a message saying, in our team, we're recruiting X amount of CRAs or X amount of CTAs. And that networking, just creating those. I always, maybe the way I approach it is try to create friends in the industry. Of course, maybe not on a personal level. You don't need to tell them how many brothers and sisters you have, but it does help to create relationships that are close, that makes someone keep you in mind for whenever there's an opportunity. They might think, oh, you know what? I would love to work with Annalisa. Let me ping her. Let me send her a message.
And I do not know if it's happening anymore, but there used to be also like this kind of referral fee. So if people actually recommend somebody in, how, like basically that I have a friend that I know is really like willing to learn and really like quick on things, I would really like to recommend him or her. And also the people who recommend get some kind of reimbursement on the referrals. So definitely, and regarding HR, do not really recommend to only be connected indeed with them, because I think HR is one of the most like roles that has a really high turnover, because I feel like they are changing every day. And
Yes.
once you have put in the hours and work to get to know this person, they might be already working in a bank, for example, as HR or on those different industries. So definitely getting to know your peers would be, I think, more helpful.
Real
than the other
networking.
department.
Charlotte, what would be your one tip?
So I agree, networking is great, especially if you get the chance to speak to people in person. It's just good to strike up conversations with a lot of people because you never know. 'Cause, for example, I went on a cruise October last year and just happened to start talking to this couple that we were sat at a table with, and she was a CRA for Parexel, and it's quite rare to come across because most people you talk to have never heard of clinical trials anyway. So yeah,
There
you
you
never know
go.
who you'll come across, and then there you go, you've got a connection to someone already, and you've had that opportunity to talk to them in person, which is great.
Yeah.
But my other tip would probably is just have a lot of patience
Yeah.
in many aspects. So yeah, it can be hard. You've applied for 50 different roles and still not heard back, or you've gotten through to certain points in the interview but not gotten further. It's really frustrating. It is. And you can get burnt out from just applying to jobs. So it's have
Yes.
patience, and even though you didn't get the job that time, take it as an opportunity so that you've got more time to develop your skills that show that you would be a good CRA. For example, like on CRAConnect, there's different learning opportunities you've got on there to do a monitoring masterclass, for example, and you've got more time to get more familiar with GCP. And so, yeah, it does feel like a knockback when you've not got a job interview or not got through, but then you've been given more time to develop skills. And so, my tip would just have to be a lot of patience
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
kind to yourself. It is hard, but it's not that you can't do the role. It's not that the role's not meant for you. It's just the industry's tough to get into.
Absolutely. It just takes time. It's the reality. I always say it takes an average of 9 to 11 months to get that first job as a CRA. And if you can wait, or if you can just be patient to get that done now, obviously in the meantime, we need to pay our bills. So feel free to obviously take on another job while you still relentless, just look for opportunities and network and get that job, because once you're in, the path is so much easier than that. Charlotte, thank you so much for having been with
Thank
us in
you.
this conversation, in this episode. It was super exciting too, and fun to have a chat with a peer CRA. And I'm thinking maybe not peer, because Annalisa, we're not CRAs anymore. But it was so much fun to just remember a little bit how our day-to-day look like as CRAs, and also what helped us and what motivated us to become CRAs and why we stayed in the industry. And I loved having this conversation. And if anyone else loved it, I hope that you enjoy it. Maybe if you have any questions, just post them in the comment section. We'll be more than happy to respond to them, to keep the conversation going. And as always, if you enjoyed this, give it a like, or maybe reshare it, repost it with your colleagues, with your potentially other CRAs. Use also this podcast to create some more network and share it among the industry. And we hope to see you at our next episode. Thank you, girls.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.